So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com on June 4, 2008. Okay, maybe not Batman and Robin. You'll have to settle for Bob and Michael. Kids, if you want to grow up to be a successful executive producer of movies like Michael Uslan did, the key is education and patience. Lots and lots of patience. Uslan secured the rights to make Batman movies years before Tim Burton, Michael Keaton, and Jack Nicholson ever dreamed of working together. And he couldn't give away the rights to Will Eisner's The Spirit for the longest time. But his patience and determination paid off. This year, what I believe is the sixth Batman movie, The Dark Knight, and the first Spirit movie will come to a multiplex near you, joining previous Uslan productions such as Batman, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, Batman Begins, Catwoman, Constantine, National Treasure, Swamp Thing. Well, you get the idea, and there's a lot more after that. And he's not one to rest on his laurels either. Uslan's current projects in development include Shazam, The Shadow, and Constantine 2. If you love comic books, and especially movies made from comic books, please welcome Michael Uslan to Mr. Media. Hello, Michael.
Hey, Bob. That was very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to have you here today. And I have a feeling we'll get some calls. Let me give out the number now before I forget.
Sure.
If you'd like to call in and talk to Michael about his work, the number is 646-595-3135. So, Michael, this is a pretty big year for you, I think.
Yeah, this is a really good year, actually. As you indicated in your intro, part of life is its journeys. And sometimes the journeys in life can turn into human endurance contests. But two of my longest-running human endurance contests have been trying to bring a dark, serious version of Batman to the silver screen and trying to bring the Spirit to the silver screen, as I had promised Will Eisner I would do. And it's very, very rewarding to see this happening. In fact, both of them now happening in the same year.
Have you ever had... you've worked on a variety of projects over the years, but have you ever had two big event movies happening in the same calendar year like this?
Yeah, actually, of movies I've been involved in 2005, I think we had both Constantine, Batman Begins, and maybe even National Treasure came out that year.
Oh, and is it safe to say of those three, National Treasure was probably the biggest surprise?
A great popcorn movie. And John Turteltaub and Jerry Bruckheimer deserve all the credit for that. It was a lot of fun. Worked really, really well. And Batman Begins, what can you say when there's a genius director who really gets it? And, Chris Nolan and David Goyer and Chuck Roven and Emma, just amazing, amazing people from start to finish. So, sometimes you get to actually watch your dreams come true, and it's a rare thing in life, but it's a wonderful thing in life.
Yeah, that was pretty big. I have to say, I was thinking mostly about talking to you about the comic book films, but I tell you, in my house, where I've got an 11-year-old daughter, National Treasure is like the greatest movie of all time.
Well, I sit here wearing my grandfather's Masonic Lodge ring from 1917, which was passed down to my dad, which has since been passed down to me. So, you can tell I really enjoyed it too.
Wow. Well, I want to make sure before we're done we come back to National Treasure because I'd like to ask you about that. But I know that the big interest is in the comic book movies, and I'm kind of wondering, how did you get into this niche? I know something of your background, and you're more than the typical fanboy who found a way to make a buck. I mean, you've got a master's degree in urban education and a law degree from Indiana University.
And interestingly, Bob, both of those actually tie into my comic book story and the journey that I've been on and trying to get out as a kid growing up in New Jersey who didn't come from money, who had no relatives in the business, who didn't know anyone in Hollywood. How do you get there from here? And my degrees really were part and parcel of the journey to try to make that transition. So it's kind of an interesting tale, I think. Beginning when I was 3 years old, and my mother swore that I learned how to read from comic books starting at the time I was 3. And my older brother Paul, used to bring them into the house. I'd see them at the barber shop, and one thing led to another. And Richie, Rich, and Casper led to Archie, which led to Superman, which led to Batman, which led to Marvel, and the rest, as they say, would be history. But I was a very, very early member of comic book fandom, along with one of my best friends, Bobby Klein, who is now a great and noted comic book historian who worked with Howard Keltner for many years. Bobby and I have done a number of introductions to the DC Archives books and some other collections. And we first began as subscribers to the Rockets Blast Comic Collector fanzine, then to
RBCC.
Yeah. We saw an ad for it. I think it was the issue of Fantastic Four with the Mad Thinker and his awesome android, which, if memory serves me, is like number 15 or so. And we got the subscription, these little mimeographed, stapled things that went out to a few hundred fans. And we then subscribed to Alter Ego, to On the Drawing Board, which was also became the Comic Reader, and introduced me ultimately to this young kid who was wound up editing and publishing the thing. What the heck was his name? Paul Levitz.
Oh, that guy.
Yeah, that guy. And we attended the world's very, very first comic book convention ever held anywhere, and that was July 1964 in a Fleabag hotel on the Bowery in New York. My parents were appalled. We literally had to step over drunks in the hallway in order to check in, and there were 200 of us at that first Comic-Con. And it was a revelation for me and Bobby because for the first time we realized we are not alone. There are other geeks like us out there who loved comic books and talked about comic books and were desperate to learn the history of comics and discover the golden age that we had missed age-wise, and to participate in this birth and growth of what we were calling then the Silver Age. We found out that most of the comic book creators, the artists, the writers, the comic book companies themselves since the 30s were all based in New York, or a lot of the creators were living in New Jersey. So we made it our mission starting in 7th grade to track them down, to go interview them, to see them, to write articles for fanzines. And as a result, I've been privileged to get so much first-hand history and knowledge and behind-the-scenes stuff from the people who actually did it. And that's something I'm very, very proud of, and resulted recently in a documentary that I produced called Legends Behind the Comic Books, where I got the histories from these people themselves of about 15 people, including Stan Lee and Joe Kubert, Irwin Hasen, Joe Simon, Jerry Robinson, the list goes on, because there's a dwindling number left who were around from the 30s to the 60s. And I felt it was really, really important to get their stories on film and get the perspective of what it was all about and what it was like.
And so now I read somewhere that you had a deal with your mother so that you could be one of the few kids from that era who got to keep his comic books.
Greatest
deal
I ever made in my life. You got to understand, I have to set the scene, that when I was first collecting comic books, the Wortham era was still ongoing, and it was still having ramifications. And parents largely were looking down at their kids bringing comic books into their homes. They were throwing them out. My poor friend Bobby, I was at his house one day where his mom really got ticked off. I forget what he had done, or I think maybe they were just messy and all over, and he hadn't straightened them up. And in light of everything Dr. Wortham had been saying, she shoveled them into the fireplace.
Oh.
and I still wake up screaming periodically. I can still visualize Amazing Fantasy 15, Spider-Man 1, Fantastic Four 4, Hulk 1 through 6. I can still picture those things going up in flames. Bobby and I recently sat down to try to figure out, I think we thought that day she probably burned what today would have been maybe $500,000 worth of comic books. So my mother made me a great deal at the time. She said if I kept them neat, and if I promised to read other things like books and magazines and newspapers, I could keep them. And keep them I did. We moved to a house in 6th grade, and my dad never got a car in the garage from day one. Instead, he built shelves along the 3 walls of the garage, floor to ceiling, and they were completely filled with my comic book collection. And then I started to use plastic bags, just the ones my mother had from the grocery, stuff that fruit came in, because there were no specifically manufactured bags for comics at the time, and stacked them up on the floor of the garage in stacks that approached the height of people. And at that time, when I was in high school, I had over 30,000 comic books dating back to 1936. Great thing back then. A couple of great things back then. One of them was nobody in those early days, outside of a few of us real hardcore fans, had any realization that old comic books had value. So Bobby and I would beg my folks, and every Friday night they would drive us to this flea market near Asbury Park, New Jersey, called Collingswood Auction, and they had a Backdate magazine stand. And on Fridays, the owner would come in with boxes and boxes filled with old comic books. And because they were so old, he only sold them for a nickel apiece. And we were taking soda bottles back all week to save as many nickels as we could. And we would literally walk out of there with hundreds of comic books at a time. And that, in addition to buying them off the newsstands at 10 or 12 cents a piece, was how I amassed my collection. And that collection today, largely at this point, I think I have donated about 40,000 comic books from my collection to Indiana University's Lilly Library, which is its rare book library, keeping about 10 or 15,000 of my favorites right now.
I have to ask you, because I'm from New Jersey, I've just got to know. I'm not going to ask you what exit, but where in New Jersey did you grow up?
105. Exit 105 off the Parkway, exit 8 off the Turnpike. I was born in Bayonne, which, of course, you know, is 14A. And I grew up down the Jersey Shore right near Asbury Park. I went to school in Ocean Township. My brother had gone to school at Asbury Park High School. And I was one of those kids that used to go in high school to the little hippie club above Tom McCann's Shoes on Cookman Avenue in Asbury Park and listen to some local bands play, including that guy, what the heck was his name? Oh, yeah, Springsteen. When he had a group called Steel Mill. And one of my friends growing up, a great guy, we were in a model rocketry club together, so you get the geekiness of who you're talking to. And his kid sister, Patty Scalfa, did pretty well for herself too.
Well, anybody who can combine comic books and Springsteen cannot be a total geek. You know, I say that in self-defense.
But New Jersey was really special. One of my mentors was Otto Binder, who was the principal writer of Captain Marvel and the Marvel family for Fawcett. Throughout the 40s and 50s, went on to D.C., where he created Supergirl and the Legion of Superheroes, and was really principal writer of the Superman family of comic books for years and years. We found out Otto lived in Englewood, New Jersey at the time, and Bobby and I went up to spend a day with him, interviewing him for a fanzine. And we developed a great relationship. He was an amazing guy, always had time for us. We would be at his house 12 hours a day asking him questions, and he would be teaching us the history of the comics. He put me in direct touch with people like C.C. Beck, Will Lieberson, who was editor of the Fawcett line, and Wendell Crowley, who was an editor of the Fawcett line, and so many people. And starting in 7th grade, I had ongoing correspondence through letters with people like C.C. Beck that went on for years. And one of the great things for me as somebody producing movies based on comics is that in a lot of cases I knew the creators, and I feel a special responsibility. And somebody asked me recently when I was giving a lecture, well, what exactly is it a producer does? What's your job? And I said, well, every Monday morning I get to report to a sandbox and play with my favorite toys. That's what I do. But I knew Otto, and I knew C.C. Beck, and now we're working on Shazam. I knew Walter Gibson and worked with Walter Gibson, and now working on The Shadow. I knew Bob Kane. I knew Bill Finger. I know Jerry Robinson. It's all very, very meaningful in that regard.
So how do we make the jump from being a collector, obviously you were a fanboy, but at some point you jumped out of that world into the film world? I imagine that having your law degree had something to do with that.
Yeah, ultimately it did. It sure did. But, we'll start out, and I'll just say that we were the kids that on whatever it was, Thursday afternoons, would, as many times as possible as we were off from school, be at the DC Comics tour and go through that and have artists sign pictures for us. Saul Harrison used to stand by a paper cutter at the end of the tour and take pages of original art and slice them into thirds and pass it out to all of the kids that were on the tour.
Oh my God.
That's how I began collecting original art, actually, and we became so annoying that eventually when he saw us, he knew, all right, and he would just give us full pages of stuff.
Wow.
But that's the kind of thing we did, and I remember hanging out with Bobby in the outer office at Marvel Comics with our copy of a few of the old comics we had, like All Winners number 18, and whoever walked in or out, we would jump up and ask them for their autograph. Sometimes we hit it, we got Jack Kirby or Stan Lee. Other times we got the Federal Express guy. But we were pretty devoted. So what do you do, Bob, when your passion in life is comic books? You love movies, you love TV, you love cartoons, but your real passion in life is comic books. What do you do with that? Growing up in the house that my brother and I grew up in, my dad was a mason, and he was a great mason. He was an old world artist. The structures, the fireplaces, and the homes he built with bricks and stones and marble, absolutely gorgeous and will stand for hundreds of years. And even though my dad worked 6 days a week, whether it was 95 degrees out in New Jersey humidity or if it was snowing, he was out there. But he loved what he did. He got up every morning before dawn, and he always woke up with a smile on his face and couldn't wait to get to work because he so loved what he did. So Paul and I would work for him on some summers as we got a little older, and it was horrible. It was just horrible. Hauling foundations in the heat and carrying bricks and carrying bags of cement. But it made both of us realize that we had to get out there and figure out what our bricks and stones were. We had to figure out what it was that would make us eager to go to work on a rainy Monday morning. And that's when I realized I had to find a way to make comic books my work and my life. My first opportunity was at Indiana University. I was an undergrad. And this was the early 70s, so it was a time of great experimentation on college campuses, needless to say. In fact, enough said about that. College of Arts and Sciences had started an experimental curriculum department. The idea being, if you could come up with an idea for a college course that had never, ever been taught before and could get the backing of a department on campus and could then appear before a panel of deans and professors and prove to them that this was worthy of academic credit, you could, in fact, get the course accredited and teach it on campus. I was a junior that year. So I went to the Department of Folklore, Dr. Henry Galassi, and made a plea, made a case why comic books are modern-day mythology, contemporary American folklore. All the plots, the motifs, the characters are really, truly the same as we find in basic folklore. And he totally agreed. I also made the pitch that comic books were an indigenous American art form, same as jazz, and deserving of recognition and study, and that comic books were sociologically reflectors of a changing American culture, our slang, our mores, our prejudices. Everything that America has been reflected every Wednesday in the pages of comic books. So I appeared before the panel of deans and professors, of course showing up in my Spider-Man T-shirt. My hair was down to my shoulders, and with my comic books in hand. And as I walked into this room, the dean looks down at the end of this long conference table, and he says to me, "So you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university?" And I knew right away I was in deep trouble. So my first official pitch began, and he let me speak for 2 or 3 minutes, and then he cut me off. And he said, "Mr. Uslan, look, I reject your theory. I'm sorry," he said, "but comic books are nothing but cheap entertainment for children." He said, "I read Superman comics as a kid. Every issue I could get my hands on I read. But all they are cheap entertainment for children. Don't tell me about art or mythology." So I said to him, "May I ask you 2 questions?" He said, "Ask me anything you'd like." I said, "Are you familiar with the story of Moses?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Very, very briefly, could you summarize for me the story of Moses?" So he folded his arms, and he goes, "I don't know what game you're playing here, but I will play this with you." And he said the Hebrew people were being persecuted, and their firstborn were being slain. So a Hebrew couple put their infant son in a little wicker basket and sent him down the River Nile. There he was discovered by an Egyptian family who raised him as their own son. When he grew up and learned of his heritage, he became a great hero to his people. I said, stop, that's great, thank you very much. I said, you said to me you read Superman comics? He said, sure. I said, do you recall the origin of Superman? He says, yeah, planet Krypton was about to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship and sent him to Earth. There he was discovered by the Kents, who raised him as their own son. When he grew up, and then he stopped and stared at me for an eternity and said, Mr. Uslan, your course is accredited.
Wow.
I then became the world's first college-accredited comic book professor.
Wow.
And that, Bob, was really the first step toward me achieving the goals of what I wanted to do in life. As I was walking back to my apartment, and I was on cloud 9 that I had achieved this. And, in fact, it's something that would soon lead me to appear in Ripley's Believe It or Not, which made my mother so proud, you have no idea. I got to my apartment, and the other half of my brain kicked in. And I realized, okay, here's this opportunity. Now, how do I use this? How do I really use this to get me where I want to go? So I picked up the telephone, and I called United Press International in Indianapolis. And at the time, that was as big a company as Associated Press is today. And I asked to speak to a reporter in charge of stories dealing with education. This poor guy gets on the phone, and I start to unload on him. I was screaming. I said, what is wrong with you? You people are supposed to be the watchdogs for our society, and I can't believe you're letting this happen. And he said, calm down. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, I heard there's a course on comic books being taught at Indiana University. This is appalling. Are you telling me as a taxpayer in this state they're using my money to teach our kids comic books? This has got to be some kind of communist plot to subvert the youth of America. And I hung up the phone. Well, Bob, it took this guy 3 days to find out if IU really had a course on comic books, and if so, who was the lunatic who was teaching it. And he came down to Bloomington and he interviewed me, and he went out with an article that was a third of a page long with pictures that was picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America and a whole bunch in Europe. And my phone never stopped ringing. I never taught one comic book class that wasn't filled with TV cameras, NBC Nightly News, CBS Evening News, reporters. There was one class I had reporters from Playboy, Penthouse, Family Weekly, and Parade magazine sitting there. And I was invited to appear on radio and TV talk shows. About 3 weeks into it, my phone rings one afternoon. And a guy says, is this Mike Uslan? And I said, yeah. He goes, hiya, Mike, this is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City.
Well, you knew him very well.
I spent a lot of time with Stan. This was the beginning of a long friendship. And in fact, I refer to this as my burning bush moment. And Stan said, Mike, everywhere I look, I'm reading about you, I'm seeing you on TV. What you're doing is great for the whole comic book industry. How can I be helpful? And he was very helpful. As a matter of fact, he immediately sent out Steve Englehart and Jerry Conway as guest lecturers, sent me comic books.
Wow.
2-3 hours later, the phone rings. It was Saul Harrison, vice president of DC Comics in New York, and it was the same conversation with a different ending. Saul said, we think you're a bright young guy with lots of innovative ideas. Carmine Infantino and I would like to fly you to New York to discuss ways we might be able to work together. Okay. And the next thing I know, I'm in New York City. So I wound up getting a job at DC Comics. They didn't have words internship at that time. We were called Junior Woodchucks. And that young punk Paul Levitt started there 6 months before I did, working largely with Joe Orlando. And there was Bob Rozakis and Steve Mitchell and Alan Asherman and Carl Gafford and Guy Lillian. And it was just a great, great group of guys. And we learned so much. And I was working at DC Summers. And then they put me on retainer when I went back to Indiana. And one of the programs they had me work on, Bob, was Edugraphics, using Superman, Batman, and Robin to teach English as a second language students and learning disabled students how to read and to motivate them to want to read. And they were working with the Graduate School of Education at Harvard. And I got deep into this program, and I was actually speaking at teachers' conventions. And we sold this to the New York City Board of Education. And in working on it, I felt I needed better credentials, and that's why I went and got my master's in urban education. So as I said earlier, my degrees are tied into my comic book story, but that was actually the root for it. So the next step is probably the day. It was 6 o'clock at night. I was just getting ready to leave DC Comics in New York to take the subway to Penn Station to take the train back down the Jersey Shore. And I hear Denny O'Neil ranting and raving and screaming and carrying on from his office. I didn't know what had happened. So I poked my head in the door. I said, "Are you okay?" He says, "No, I'm not okay." He said, "There's a shadow script suddenly due, and it's due tomorrow, and I don't even have an idea for a story. They had canceled the book, and then they reinstated it at the last second, and I got 43 other things I got to do." And so I said, "Well, Denny, I have an idea for a shadow story." He said, "You do?" I didn't, but I saw it was a moment. I saw it was a chance to get my foot in the door. So
right.
I'm rambling. Do you want me to go on with this, or?
No, please. Yeah.
Okay. So he says, "Come in," and as I'm sitting there talking to him, I'm kind of hemming and hawing until I can come up with the story. And it was based on a trip I had just taken to Niagara Falls, and I used that as a backdrop. And the next thing I know, he says, "I like the story, I like the idea, I like the cover visualization." He says, "Can you have it on my desk by 6 o'clock tomorrow night?" I said, "No problem." So I took a yellow pad, started writing on the subway, on the train back down the shore, got home, told my mom to put on a pot of black coffee. I was pulling an all-nighter, wrote through the night, wrote on the train and the subway back, paid off one of the secretaries in a deal that will never be revealed, so I could submit pages to her all day long while she typed it up. And at 6 o'clock that night, I handed in my shadow script, and suddenly I'm a writer at DC Comics.
Wow.
I forget how long went by, and I'm walking in the halls, and Julie Schwartz, who is one of the greatest editors of all time, one of the most important editors of all time, a fabulous man, very gruff exterior, but once you got to know him, the guy was a total marshmallow. And Julie's walking the other way. He goes, "Hey, kid." I go, "Yeah, Julie." He said, "Read your shadow script." I said, "You did?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "It didn't stink." I said, "Oh, thank you so much. Oh, my God, that's great. Thank you." And that led to him saying, "Would you like to take a shot at Batman?" And then Bob Rozakis and I wound up doing some detective comics for him. And all of a sudden, one of these dreams I had since I was 8 years old to be a writer of Batman comics because he was my favorite superhero came true, and bingo. And that led to an epiphany one day when I said, "Oh, my God, this dream I had since I was 8 has come true. I need a new dream in life. What's my next thing? What do I want to try to achieve?" And within 10 minutes, I knew it would be to do a dark, serious version of Batman as a movie, to show the world that he was something other than a pow-zap-wham, pot-bellied funny guy, and that he was a creature of the night who stalked criminals from the shadows. And that became my next goal. So, you can kind of see how it all fed into that and led to that.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
Okay.
Because I don't want to run out of time with you, but how did you get to the point that you, and this is what I'm kind of assuming happened, that you started acquiring the rights to these characters to make movies, movie options.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I went back to Saul Harrison, who had mentored me into the business. Mm-hmm. I said, "Saul, I want to make a movie, a dark, serious version of Batman." And he put his arm around me, very fatherly toward me, and said, "Michael, since Batman went off the air on TV, nobody's been interested in Batman. He is as dead as a dodo in the world of movies and television." He said, "Save your money." I said, no, Saul, I really think I could do this, and it'd be something so totally different. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. He said, "All right, look, go get credentials. Nobody's going to come around and buy the rights to Batman. Go get credentials and then come back and see me." And that was a big influence on my going to law school. I couldn't get my foot in the door creatively in the movie industry. I sent out 372 resumes at the end of college. I did real well in college. And I got 2 potential job offers. One would have been to work in the mailroom of a big talent agency for $90 a week. And the other one would have been to be a production assistant, go for coffee, and work for $90 a week in L.A. And I decided law school sounded like a good alternative. And I would take as many courses as I could having anything to do with entertainment or communications. And in fact, at Indiana Law School, they let me go write an independent study paper of 104 pages on copyright infringement in the comic book industry. So I actually was able to, in law school, do stuff related to this. I got out of law school, immediately went to work for United Artists, which at that time was the only movie studio based in New York when it was one of the big movie studios. And for the next almost 4 years, I got the greatest training in the world as to how you finance and produce movies, and got to work on some amazing films, being in charge of legal business affairs for different films that included the first few Rocky pictures, Black Stallion, Raging Bull, Apocalypse Now, which was like a crisis every day for 2.5 years. But the training was absolutely incredible. And as I came to the 4-year mark, I felt I had learned what I wanted to learn. I never wanted to be stuck or trapped being a lawyer. And I went back to Saul, and I said, I got the credentials. He says, okay, come on in. And I knew I couldn't do it unless I had a partner. I couldn't represent myself in a deal. I was too emotionally tied to it. I didn't know how to mount a production. And I found one of the great legends of this business, Ben Malachor, who ran MGM for 30 years. Ben was on the parent board of Lowe's MGM. He was the chairman of their film selection committee. He was executive vice president. All divisions reported to him. He put together the deals for Ben-Hur, Dr. Zhivago, 2001, Gigi, and all of their musicals. And Ben came aboard as my partner, believing that this Batman thing, a Dark Series version, could work. And it was a 6-month negotiation with DC. And on October 3rd, 1979, Ben and I formed Bat Film Productions and acquired the rights to Batman. And
wow.
Everything changed from that moment on. I was so cocksure that the companies would be lined up at my door for this. And they would be able to see, and again, there was no word franchise at the time, but that they would be able to see it was a pre-sold property worldwide that could appeal to multiple generations, and that there could be toys and games and apparel, sequels, animation. And I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. Everyone.
Now, Michael, I have to ask you, because I know people are going to ask me why I wouldn't ask you this. At that point, nobody wanted the rights to Batman. What did it cost you?
I'm actually not permitted to discuss the terms of this specific contract.
Okay, let me frame it this way.
But it was not at all cheap.
Oh, it was not cheap. Even though nobody wanted it, they still didn't let it go for a song.
Correct. Okay. Because the Superman movie had come out. So they knew there was value in Superman, but I don't think at that time the people there felt there was really any true value in Batman, but they at least had a former deal that they could go by.
Can you put me in the ballpark? Are we talking 5 figures or 6?
Nah, I really can't.
Okay. Hey, can't blame a guy for trying. Okay, back to the story. So you've got the rights, and nobody wants them. Meanwhile, I'm guessing you're out of pocket quite a few dollars. Well,
it was a scary time. It was a real scary time, and it was my first real test. You know, my mother had always taught us, you stand up for what you believe in. You make a commitment. You see it through. You be responsible, and even if you have to take a lot of crap and go through hell, you stand up and you do what you need to do. So it was a matter of tightening the belt 2 more notches and keep going. And I do a lot of lecturing now and speak a lot of colleges, and had the privilege of giving the commencement address at Indiana University recently to 30-some-odd thousand people. And I can look them in the eye and tell them that the only thing I can guarantee you in life is that doors are going to slam in your face. And what happens to you when that happens? Well, you only have 2 choices. You go home and cry about it, or you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you go back and knock again, and you just keep knocking till your knuckles bleed. There's no alternative. And you better have a high threshold for frustration. So the best way I can give you the picture is to give you my 2 favorite rejections of Batman that came from 2 different studios. At Columbia, I pitched my heart out for the Dark Series Batman, and at the end of it, the head of production looked at me, shook his head, gave me a tisk-tisk, and said, "Michael, you're insane. Batman would never do well because our movie Annie didn't do well. And this was already years into it. And I said, Annie, I said, are you talking about the little redhead girl who sings Tomorrow? He said, yeah. I go, well, what does that have to do with Batman? He said, come on, Michael. They're both out of the funny pages.
Right.
At my alma mater, I was rejected and told that I was crazy, that Batman and Robin would never work as a movie because the movie Robin and Marion didn't do well. Now, that was a movie about an aging Robin Hood and Maid Marian with Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn. I just stared at the guy, and then I just picked up my stuff and walked out. Over the years, I have climbed mountaintops and sat in a lotus position and pondered what he said, and could only believe that they turned Batman down because both of those movies had the word Robin in the title. Nothing else seems to make sense. But that gives you an idea of what I was going through. Comic books were looked down upon, generally, by Hollywood. They were just like that dean who saw them merely as lurid and cheap entertainment for children and had no respect, really, toward any of the writers, the creators, the properties. And that's been part of what I've been fighting in Hollywood and working against and working to overcome in the last 32 years in the trenches. And there's been a sea change. And that's part of the reason I think that we're now in the golden age of comic book movie making, because there has been a sea change. And this new generation of talent, agents, studio execs, are people who have grown up with the works of Stan Lee and Julie Schwartz and these creations and do have a respect for them. And part of the battle we've been waging is to convince them, and this has taken an awful lot, believe me, that comic books are not a genre. It's not something that's going to be hot this summer and cold the next, but that rather, just like plays, just like novels, it's a series of ongoing literary properties with great stories and colorful characters that don't get hot or cold, and that they are not synonymous with superheroes, that anything they're looking from the shelves of Borders or Barnes & Noble, I can bring them in the form of comic books, whether it's westerns, war, humor, science fiction, fantasy, you name it, and we can find it in comics. And part of the reason we are in a golden age is because as this has been dawning on people, and movies have been coming out based on comics and graphic novels like A History of Violence and Road to Perdition in this spirit, it's really been an important hurdle that we finally have overcome.
So how long did you, from the time that you acquired the movie rights to Batman till that first Tim Burton film came out?
10 years.
10 years. And during that period of time, at what point did you acquire your next option on a comic book character for a movie?
Well, right after that, Ben and I realized that it was going to take a little while to get Batman up and running. And we were thinking, oh, this could take 2 or 3 years. So we wanted to do something cheap, quick, and something that we knew we could set up right away. And we went back and acquired the rights to Swamp Thing. And ultimately, that thing produced movies, live-action series, animated series, toy line, all sorts of merchandising. It was pretty incredible. And it was my first experience. I was in my 20s. And I kept hearing that it gave me the experience of 11 films trying to do the one. And we did it on an absolute shoestring budget, trying to do like a 1950s rubber-suited monster movie. And I quickly learned the facts of life, and, you know, instead of like $1.9 million, we should have had $19 million. But it was a great, great learning experience, and really set me on the road to growing up in the business.
Did the movie do that, or did having Adrienne Barbeau in there?
Oh, Adrienne was fabulous. Adrienne was, she's still fabulous. You know, she was the voice of Catwoman on Batman cartoons. More recently, just a great, great lady.
And so you acquired the rights to Swamp Thing, which was really not a terribly hot property at the time.
No, it had really been discontinued.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. And then what character was next?
Well, then we did a couple of things. Number one is I'm a history major, and I always wanted to do a miniseries. And I wanted to do it 100% historically accurate, not like the miniseries that were showing up on TV at that time, where you'd see George Washington and there'd be a 747 behind him flying by, or designer sneakers on his troops. I really wanted to do an accurate piece. And we did Three Sovereigns for Sarah for American Playhouse on PBS with Patrick McGowan, Vanessa Redgrave, Kim Hunter, and Phyllis Thaxter. And it was the 100% historically accurate tale of the Salem witch trials of 1692. Very, very proud of that. It's still available today on PBS home video. And we also, I wanted to get into animation. And at that time, I had young kids, and my son was fascinated with dinosaurs and outer space. And I realized I was too when I was a kid, and everybody I knew was boys. So I was trying to think of how can I create stories for him combining dinosaurs and outer space, and I came up with this title, Dinosaucers. And I used that and started telling him stories and turned it into an animated TV series that ran for 5 years in syndication and then at Family Channel and USA Network. And we did 65 half hours with Sony, Coca-Cola, Columbia, and just had a great time doing that. And then that was followed by, ultimately we brought Carmen Sandiego to TV with Where on Earth is Carmen Sandiego for Fox Kids, which won us the Emmy Award for Best Animated Series. So, there were a lot of diverse things we were doing and a whole bunch of projects we tried to do that, wilted on the vine and never got there.
Well, Michael, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We've got a caller who's been hanging in there. Let's see what we've got here. Heidi, you have a question for Michael Uslan?
Yes, hello. How long did it take you to film Batman?
Well, it took 10 years from the time we acquired the rights till the film actually was made. And the film started production in October of '88 and finished about November, December, about 4 months later. And that was shot at Pinewood Studios in just outside London.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks for calling. Let me give out the phone number again because people may not have heard it the first time. It's 646-595-3135 if you've got a question or comment for Michael Uslan, producer of the upcoming films The Dark Knight and Will Eisner's The Spirit. I almost slipped there. When did you acquire the rights to The Spirit, Michael?
If memory serves me, I think it was roughly 14 years ago. I got a call from Will Eisner. And first I have to preface this. I was a fan of The Spirit. First things I saw of consequence, the Herald Tribune in New York had done, in its magazine section, they had Will Eisner do a couple of new pages of The Spirit in the 60s at the time of the John Lindsay administration.
Right.
And then at the first comic book convention, I saw some old spirits, and somebody was marketing spirit bags where you could get black and white reproductions of the original early Spirit inserts. But the thing that really set me off was 2 25-cent issues of the Spirit comic book that were published by Harvey Comics in the 60s when Joe Simon was the editor there. And I just fell in love with it. I also remember reading a Spirit story in Help magazine, which I also loved at the time. So that turned me on to it. And when Will Eisner called and said, Michael, I have some interest. A famous director in Hollywood has expressed interest in The Spirit. And I've asked around, and everybody I talk to in the industry says, well, if you're interested in bringing your property and want to maintain its integrity, why don't you talk to Michael? He says, so I'm calling you to see if this is of any interest to you. So Will and Ben and I met at the Harvard Club in New York. We had a wonderful lunch together and determined that absolutely this was something that I wanted to do, and it would not be an easy sell. I explained to Will, from my experience going out into Hollywood with a guy in a fedora and a suit and tie, without superpowers was going to be challenging, and it was going to take time. but I would not let anyone touch it unless we did it respectfully and really made it work. And that was what set us on the course. And now I thought nothing I would ever do in life would take longer than the 10 years it took me to bring a dark and serious Batman to the screen. And here we are 14 years out, but this is a great movie. The Spirit movie, Frank Miller, God bless him, he just delivered in every way as the writer and director of this film, and it's exciting, and it's different, and it's unique, and it captures the humor and of Eisner and the look of Central City, and it's colorful, and I'm just thrilled with what's been done here, and very excited about it. And best of all for me is when it opens, I will look the wonderful and lovely Ann Eisner in the eye and say, "Here's everything I promised, Will."
Well, I want to ask you. You touched on something that has come up a lot, and that Frank Miller actually addressed in his own blog this week, that a lot of people were concerned that maybe he didn't know how to capture the humor of the Spirit, and there was some concern after the first trailer came out. So are you saying that Frank does get the humor, that there is humor in this movie?
Oh, absolutely. Frank's blog is wonderful. I really urge everybody to go out and read it. He is so insightful, and he is... Will Eisner was his mentor, and I say anybody that thinks Frank Miller doesn't get Will Eisner should read the book, Eisner Miller, that documents a long weekend that they spent together. That's fascinating. The respect the two men had for each other, and the differences in their opinions, which I think sometimes were really generational, are wonderful reading, And Frank knew that this had to be as daring and innovative and pushing the envelope as Will Eisner would have wanted, because that's the way Will did everything he ever created, everything he ever drew. And it had to be respectful to the master storyteller, and Frank is also a master storyteller. And it's just very, very exciting. And I'll tell you, everybody involved in this project, my producing partners, Deborah Del Prete and Gigi Pritzker, Ben Melnick, Steve Mayer, F.J. DeSanta, Linda McDonough, all the people from Lionsgate and Odd Lot Entertainment, everybody is just, we're united like one voice about this film. Very excited about it.
We've got another call for you. I want to squeeze him in here because I know people didn't have the chance to call before. Hi, you have a question or a comment for Michael Uslan?
Oh, hello. This is
Hi.
Lola. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Hi, Lola. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Great.
Hi, thanks for taking my phone call. I want to say that, I like the first Batman, all the Batmans, yeah, it's great. And Kim Basinger, I want to say, she was beautiful in it, but she's also a great actress, and that was a good pick.
That, you got to give all the credit in the world to Tim Burton for that.
Yeah.
There was another actress who was slated to play the role, and she injured herself, and he got Kim in kind of last minute, and I thought she was absolutely perfect.
She was, yes, she did a great job. She didn't overdo it, and then, she just was great. She was in the moment, and she had a lot of energy. So that's all I wanted to say, that was a perfect choice there. And it's hard to find casting that fits together,
You're so right about it, and one of the great things in terms of Frank's choices on the Spirit, when you talk about great actresses, the movie with Scarlett Johansson and Ava Mendes and Paz Vega and Sarah Paulson and Jamie King, and again, really, really amazing choices.
Yes, of course. I want to say thank you very much. This is Lola from New York.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much for taking my phone call.
Good talking to you.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for calling in, Lola.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Lola is I believe, has her own show on Blog Talk Radio, so we're always happy to hear from her. Now, I haven't really asked you anything about The Dark Knight, which I guess opens very soon. Is there anything you can tell us about the leading up to that film? Was there anything in the we all know about the tragedy that hit the film almost post-production, but was there anything to the story of that film before it got made or in the early process?
the one thing that I do want to say about it is that, and all fans I think should acknowledge it, and I think they do acknowledge it, is that as proven by Batman Begins, Chris Nolan gets it. He's a genius, and I can't wait for everybody to go see this movie. And you look at the whole team on this movie that included Chris and his brother and Emma and Chuck Roven and an amazing cast, an absolutely incredible, amazing cast, and it's all just very, very exciting. And when you talk about dreams come true, and long ago hoping that ultimately a dark, serious version of Batman would arrive and would stick, and it's very, very wonderful to see something like that happen.
I don't know why it's taken me this long, but before we started talking, I went to the site, which is The Dark Knight, Knight with a K, thedarknight.warnerbros.com. Maybe there's a simpler version of it. That's where I wound up, and watched the latest trailer, and it looks very cool. I mean, it's the Christian Bale Heath Ledger combination is very different than Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. I mean, it's a completely different spin, and it seems to be a whole lot darker than the Tim Burton films.
Yeah, well, you can't redo things that were already done. You have to find new and inventive ways to do them, and that's one of the reasons I think Chris Nolan deserves all the credit in the world. I think it's a tour de force. And I also want to mention, too often ignored in the process, are the people at DC Comics who are so important to everything that's being done. And that's Paul Levitz and Gregory Novak, two really amazing guys who, again, truly understand what it's all about.
In the time we've got left, talk to me a little bit about the movies you have currently in production. Obviously, The Dark Knight and The Spirit, they are, The Dark Knight's got to be done, and The Spirit's probably in some post-production. But you've got Shazam, The Shadow, and the sequel, Constantine 2. I didn't see Constantine 1, I'll be honest with you. I know that's based on the Hellblazer comic, but that one never cracked my conscience. But Shazam and The Shadow, those are part of my childhood, going back a long way. I used to listen to the Shadow radio shows on Sunday afternoon. I think it was WHN in New York used to rebroadcast them. I think that
sounds right. For a while, there was a station in Newark that used to do it on Sundays, too.
Okay, so and growing up in New Jersey, we probably heard the same stuff. Tell me, let's start with with Shazam, which of course is Captain Marvel, Billy Batson. It would seem to me, I mean, I remember the TV show in the early 70s, and I loved that. But I was 11 or 12 years old then, and I know of late there's been some more, there've been some darker versions of Captain Marvel, which seems impossible to me in the comics. Where will that go? What's the direction on that?
Well, it's probably a hybrid. It takes a lot from Fawcett and a lot from the Jerry Ordway stuff, and a bit from here and a bit from there, and reconstituted as something that's very contemporary. Tone works great, and it's a very exciting project, really exciting project. And just like in the Spider-Man films, where there's that sense of humor to it that you see crop up, and the interesting, fascinating parts of the character Peter Parker behind it. I think you'll see a lot of that kind of thing successfully translated into Shazam. And the director is a phenomenal guy, Pete Siegel, who's got a movie, Get Smart, that's opening up very shortly. And,
same director, interesting.
And Michael Ewing on the producing side, and everybody's really been spectacular about this, and I have very, very high hopes for this, and hope there will be some very, very important announcements coming up pretty soon.
And then The Shadow, I'm actually one of those guys who I actually like the Alec Baldwin version. I saw it again just a few weeks ago. It was on AMC or something, and I love that. My wife that was actually the first comic book exposure she had, and she loved that movie. And I never really got why people hated it so much. What will you do differently? And I'm guessing The Shadow will probably be darker than the Baldwin version.
Yeah, well, I didn't see it the same way you did. I'll admit that. And I think the moment of the old movie that truly lost me was when Shawan Khan reappeared and kind of as Genghis Khan reincarnated in a sense. And,
yeah, I agree with you on that.
Meets Lamont Cranston, and if I remember, the dialogue went something like this: "Nice suit, Cranston, where you get?" And he says, "Brooks Brothers." And Shawan Khan says, "Midtown or downtown?" That's kind of the point where it lost me.
Yeah. I agree completely about that. But in my head, I keep hearing Margot Lane, you know, he's calling out with his mind Margot Lane to come rescue him. I don't know. There are parts of that movie I just loved.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Well, you're being polite. I appreciate that.
I'm partnered on that with Sam Raimi and Josh Stonin, and two amazing partners to have. I'm very, very lucky in terms of the people that I've gotten to work with over the years. You know, I hate to keep using the word geniuses, but there are a whole bunch of creative geniuses I've been privileged to work with. And that's in development over at Sony. And we hope to be able to have some really great things to announce, you know, in the coming months on that as well. You know, keep in mind, in both these cases, again, I knew Otto Binder very well. I corresponded for a couple of years with C.C. Beck. I knew, and I actually worked on a project with Walter Gibson and had a chance to talk to him directly about The Shadow. And so these things are very, very personally important to me. And that's one of the things that keeps the passion going, that keeps me excited about what I do, and allows that 12-year-old boy to stay alive inside no matter how gray I'm getting. And and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's just like my dad said, I get to go to work on a rainy Monday morning and say, boy, this is great. And The Shadow and Shazam are going to continue that for me.
And last question. What rights are you holding to other characters that have not been picked up yet?
Only The Shadow knows.
Oh, come on now. Come on now. You know, we've got all these Hollywood producers listening who'd love to acquire some comic book characters. Are there other characters that you have the rights to?
Yeah, sure. And but not any that I'm ready to announce yet. You know, to me, one of the parts of this whole game in Hollywood is, you know, just by announcing you've taken out an option on it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot. Once you've got a script or you've got a writer attached or a director attached or a place to set it up, you know, once you've got something to make it a little bit more real, it's more significant. So I like to kind of reserve those kind of announcements and wait until we have the right elements and then make an announcement that's going to be of some importance.
And I was just going to ask you about that. So you've got, I didn't ask you about Constantine. I guess I'm a little surprised that's coming out with a second movie. Will that be Keanu Reeves again?
Well, that's just in development, and there's no decisions about anything regarding that. I will say this about the first movie. You should see it. And you need to see it without interruption, without the phone ringing. You have to concentrate on that film. That film is written on 3 levels, and everything you want to know is there. But I believe it takes about 3 viewings to really absorb everything that's in that film. And it was fabulous to work on that, again, with fabulous people. And I think as you absorb everything that's really been put in that movie, and you look at the great work of Francis Lawrence, the director, it was his first feature that he did, and you look at, he's now gone on to I Am Legend, and I still claim that man could be our next Alfred Hitchcock. He has so much talent, it's scary, just scary. And it was really, really a great experience.
Well, I realize I did not get to ask you much about National Treasure, but I don't want to keep you here all day. I have a feeling if we went through all of your films, and we didn't even touch your animation, and other things, you comic book writing, you've mentioned briefly. So we'll have to bring you back another time. Maybe as we get closer to the release of The Spirit, we can come back and talk about Eisner and Miller a little more.
Sounds great.
Michael, I just, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today. It was a lot of fun.
This was a pleasure for me. I love communicating with the fans, and I think what you're doing is great. And, so let's put it in the books, and we'll do it again.
That would be great. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Good luck. Good luck with The Dark Knight. All right, bye-bye.
Thanks.
So, folks, you can watch a trailer for The Dark Knight at http://TheDarkKnight, that's night with a K, .warnerbros, BROS.com. Or you can catch a preview of Michael Uslan's other film, Will Eisner's The Spirit, at www.mycityscreams, yes, screams.com. That's all solid, mycityscreams.com. And for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my conversations with the stars and creators of Army Wives, 24, The Big Bang Theory, Pearls Before Swine, Tell Me You Love Me, and many others. You can also read full transcripts of many of those interviews. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, or iTunes. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate you sharing a little piece of your day with us here on Mr. Media. Talk to you again real soon.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.